2013, the House and Senate passed and the governor signed into law New Hampshire's first presidential primary legislation. On that same date, in 1901, our neighbor Connecticut also broke ground. They passed our nation's first speed limit law. You can be the judge which state did better on legislation on May 21st in this day in history. For 100 years, our New Hampshire primary has served as the highway to the White House for candidates seeking our nation's highest office. For some, the primary has been the fast lane from obscurity into notoriety. For others, the primary has been a breakdown lane for candidates unable to handle our frost heaves. And finally, it's been a victory lane for a select few who combine exceptional skills with a unique appreciation of our state's cultural history and traditions and values in winning our nation's most dynamic and most effective presidential proving ground, the New Hampshire presidential primary. Today, we celebrate the primary's centennial birthday. The generations before us who have made the primary what it is, and the generations of today and tomorrow that will continue our tradition well into the 21st century and beyond. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim, and I am really honored to be here today to help celebrate the 100th anniversary and birthday of our presidential primary. But I want to take a minute because I think this really is not just about 100 years of our primary, but it's about the people of New Hampshire. Because the success of our primary really has been about the New Hampshire people standing up, participating, casting their votes. And you know, as one reporter once put it, the New Hampshire primary is probably the biggest job interview that anyone can go through. Because we, the people of the state, we get to know the candidates not just as politicians, but as real people. We have them in our living rooms, in our VFW halls, in our town meetings, and it's a real important process that we put these candidates through to get to know them, not only on the issues, but to get to know them as real people. So I think that is a real credit to the role that New Hampshire plays. But I want to take a minute, too, to talk about, I mentioned the people of New Hampshire, and people like Jim Merrill and Tom Rath are really good examples of what happens after the primary as well. Because they put their hearts and souls into their campaigns this past year with Mitt Romney. Some of us were on the Barack Obama side. But when the election was over, they are two individuals who actually stood up, picked up the phone, congratulated the other side, and handled the election with the kind of grace that I think we all would like to see politicians today handle politics. So they are the kind of example of what the New Hampshire people are all about when it comes to this primary. So it is a tribute to not just the role we play, but the people of the state that we celebrate this today. And so on that note, there's probably nobody whose face is more familiar nationwide with the New Hampshire presidential primary than our Secretary of State, Bill Gardner. So it's a pleasure to introduce Billy Gardner.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. This is a special day in New Hampshire. In the old days, they'd call it a red letter day. I'm here just to present to you a film. Last night, the oldest living legislator, who was born in 1913, is in her 100th year, like the primary, did a brief interview because she just couldn't make it. And that's at the beginning for about a minute and a half. And then there is a meeting with Edith Atkins. You don't know who Edith Atkins is, but she was the granddaughter of Representative Stephen Bullock, who was the one in the House who authored this legislation in 1913. And no one had given any recognition to Representative Bullock over the years. He died in 1941, nothing in his obituaries about the presidential primary that he was a sponsor, because it wasn't created to be the first in the nation. It was simply created to let him and others have a chance to make the decision as to who was going to go to the national convention. So the town clerk of Richmond, who was sitting right at this table here, found someone who was related, and luckily actually knew him very well, because Edith Atkins' mother died shortly after she was born, and Edith was raised by her grandmother and her grandfather. And so when I asked Edith if we could meet with her, and we met in the Richmond Town Library, one-room building, back in 1999. And the second part is about 5 minutes of that interview with Edith. She talked about what he was like and her memories growing up as a little girl and taking her to Concord with him, with her grandmother. When that's completed, you'll notice in that film that there were 4 at the table with Edith. The town clerk of Richmond, former Governor Hugh Gregg, the editor of the editorial page of the Keene Sentinel, Guy McMillan, Richmond's in Cheshire County, and the first story about Stephen Bullock was as a result of that interview in the Keene Sentinel. And so Guy McMillan will get up to add a few personal remarks about those moments that day, and then we will proceed in the program. So I'd like to...
Well, in those days, tax bills were delivered in person by the tax collector. And people always knew that they were going to get the tax bill from the tax collector. And people in those days put their money in sugar bowls and bureau drawers or wherever it could be safely put without spending it, waiting for the tax collector. And he was driving, I think it was still a 1916 Buick. He always drove Buick. And top down. I remember going to one place one time. It was laughable. It wasn't at the time. But we drove up to this place, and my grandfather got out and went to the house. The lady in the house came out and asked him in, and here I was sitting in the front seat of this car. The windshield was between me and what should come out of the house, but a monkey. And the monkey come trotting down, jumped upon the engine of the car, and looked at me through the windshield. Well, I'm telling you, how many 5-year-old kids brought up on a farm never saw a real life monkey?
How about, did he ever take you to Concord, to the legislature?
Yes, he did. Later on, he was always the representative from Richmond, both parties, because Richmond didn't have, this was not a Democrat, very much a Democrat. And he would be gone, but once in a while, he'd take my grandmother and they'd go along. And we booked in at the Eagle Hotel. And the first time, I think I remember, we sat in the upper gallery upstairs and watched the proceedings. And of course, me being real young, got restless, and so we went out. But I do remember sitting up in the gallery watching the proceedings. I was really too young to take in what it all meant. I thought I'd given Pam that picture of, it was a paper that was quoted on, I think it was from the Manchester Union, maybe, in 1939. This picture, some legislator, and I can't remember his name, had a big birthday bash in Wolfboro. And the first picture was these 3 gentlemen, and it said something like the 3 oldest legislators in New Hampshire. And I have the paper at home. If you come, I'll show it to you. I thought I had given it to Pam.
They had straw hats on.
And he had this hat on that day. And
Yeah, that hat. There's a picture of him in the paper with that hat.
yes.
The celebration of the 3 oldest legislators.
One was 88, one was 92, and my grandfather was 82. But he'd come in and my grandmother had dinner ready, but he'd sit down and smoke a pipe after dinner and before he went back out farming again. And in the evening, when I was really young, it was kerosene lights.
Did he read in the evening?
Yes.
Newspapers, books?
I'm trying to think that the mailman came maybe about 2 o'clock or something like this. And then if he wasn't doing too much, he'd come in and take the Boston Globe, he'd look through it. And, but in the evening is when he really sat down and enjoyed his newspaper. And I remember sitting in the kitchen in the winter time. The kitchen fire was going in the big cook stove and kept the fire going all night. This was before we had the furnace put in. And we had the stove in the living room. And my bedroom was just above the kitchen, and they had these floor registers, and heat could go right up through. Well, in the evening, he would go down cellar and bring up a couple of apples, sit down and pare the apples, and give us all some apples. And he always he liked to have an apple before he went to bed.
At all.
No.
But what do you think he would, do you think he'd have any idea today that what he did would turn into this national and international event?
I think he would be amazed, I really do, but pleased. He was very, a very staunch Democrat, I want to say. The Boston Globe was the paper that came into the house. And he would, well, I guess over the years that he promoted maybe, the Democrat candidate or whoever it was, but I don't remember because, politics went over my head at a young age. I wrote for the Richmond Rooster quite a bit of time, and maybe if I just read a few words here, what I wrote about, let's see, my grandfather had been tax collector, health officer, and had served several terms in the state legislature. They were members of the Richmond Grange and always took active parts in Grange suppers, dances, and fairs. And I went along to everything. There were no babysitters back then. Even in the winter, in the old pound sleigh, tucked away under buffalo robes, blankets, and freestones at our feet, I was trundling along. And I am sure that to the jingle of those bells on Old Jerry, I fell asleep.
Charlie Bass just said that throughout that interview I have yet to write a single word, but I wasn't doing the recording on that interview, I was part of it. When I was 8 years old, 40 years later, or 38 years later, after the events that she spoke about, my father took me to the City Hall in Keene to watch and listen to Mr. Republican. You know who that was? Robert Taft, a senator from Ohio, the head of the Republicans in the Senate, and the man that was widely believed to be running for president, and he came to Keene. And my father said, "You're going to remember this." He was right, 60 years later. But that was a big event in Keene at the time because Richard Upton from over this way had changed the rules of Stephen Bullock's primary invention, And we had a primary where the names of the candidates were on the ballot starting in '52. And so the candidates started showing up. And I remember that night in the city hall, everybody's wearing, I think it was all men there, I don't know why, I didn't see any women. Everybody's wearing those rubber boots, you know, that clip over, big ugly boots. And so they got in there and they took those off. It was very close, it wasn't a very pleasant atmosphere. But anyway, Mr. Taft spoke and we had our primary and Dwight David Eisenhower won it. So that was the end of Mr. Republican for them. But what happened over the next 40 years or so is that our primary became really increasingly exciting to those of us who live in the state, because these people would come to visit us. I was just mentioning, I remember when Gene McCarthy was in Keene and brought to Keene by Paul Newman, who said, don't just look at me, I'm here to draw the crowd, but listen to him. So it was a good thing. There were an awful lot of these over 40 years. And people would ask us, particularly people in the media would be asked, why do you guys get to have the first primary? What's so special about you? And I spent quite a few years trying to think up what was so special about us. I had some good days and some bad days, but what I didn't know until 1999, which I think most of us didn't know, was that the primary had been initiated as an extension of democracy by Stephen A. Bullock, so that we would not be electing our candidates in back rooms, but we would have a public contribution. And people first were voting for delegates who had said they would support particular candidates. But by 1952, that primary, we were actually voting for the candidates themselves. And that was the excitement, and also the reason, if anybody ever asks you, why we're the first in the nation primary. We weren't first then. Minnesota was ahead of us, and Indiana, and then probably some others. But they kind of bailed out, they got bored, but we stuck with it. And by 1952, we had the first in the nation primary, and we've held on to it since then. And we have pretty much rights to it now, I think. And so I mentioned this as my legacy when I spent the last 10 years explaining this to people. And we can continue to explain it to people that this was not a fluke. It was something that was done deliberately by a Democratic legislator from Richmond. And I think we are, in fact, even now, 100 years to the day after the bill was signed, living out the Democratic legacy of Stephen A. Bullock. And I congratulate his memory on that. Thank you.
I think we've heard a little bit so far about the New Hampshire primary, and those of us that are here from New Hampshire, or anyone who's not that's ever been here during a presidential primary, certainly knows that in New Hampshire, the primary is not just an event. It's an energy, an attitude that reflects our state's civic engagement. First in the nation, making history and shaping the direction of our national political discussion each and every presidential election. 100 years ago, a citizen legislator, as you heard, Democratic Representative Stephen A. Bullock from Richmond, introduced House Bill 430. That bill established New Hampshire's presidential primary, beginning with the 1916 election. This shifted some of the power from, as we heard, from the back rooms and from the national party bosses to the citizens of New Hampshire. Just as we have today, in 1913, there was a Democratic governor. There also was a Republican House and a Democratic Senate, just the opposite of what we have today. But though divided, they were able to work together and pass important legislation that I think we would all agree includes House Bill 430. This is the cornerstone of the vibrant political culture that thrives now in our living rooms across the state today. Representative Bullock was a modest man, And he took no credit for his actions. In fact, as you heard, he was unrecognized for his tremendous contribution to our state's rich tradition until 1999. Today, we are acting to ensure that his contribution receives the recognition that it deserves. It's my honor to read to you now House Resolution 10, which will be taken up on the House floor when we're in session tomorrow. New Hampshire House of Representatives, House Resolution 10, honoring the 100th anniversary of the New Hampshire presidential primary and the Honorable Stephen A. Bullock. Whereas, the first in the nation New Hampshire presidential primary plays a critical role in vetting and preparing candidates who seek our nation's highest office, and whereas House Bill 430, an act to provide for the election of delegates to the National Convention by direct vote of the people, was enacted on May 21st, 1913. And whereas, for 100 years, the citizens of New Hampshire have taken their responsibility to participate in the presidential selection process seriously and ensured the enduring vitality and relevance of the first in the nation primary. And whereas the Honorable Stephen A. Bullock, a state representative from Richmond, sponsored the original legislation in order to allow New Hampshire citizens the opportunity to witness and to participate in this highest of civic endeavors, the selection of our nation's president. And whereas Stephen A. Bullock never sought attention for his vital role in the creation of the presidential primary, and his contribution went unrecognized until 1999, now therefore be it resolved by the New Hampshire House of Representatives in regular session convened that the New Hampshire House celebrates the 100th anniversary of the creation of the New Hampshire presidential primary. And be it further resolved that the Honorable Stephen A. Bullock be granted the highest praise, accolades, and recognition as the father of the New Hampshire presidential primary. And be it further resolved that expressions of thanks be extended to his family, and a suitable copy of this resolution be prepared for presentation to them, offered by the House of Representatives. Next year, I will also be sponsoring legislation, and the Republican caucus leader, Representative Chandler, has agreed to co-sponsor it with me. Legislation to create a commission to properly plan for the celebration in 2016 of the 100th anniversary of the New Hampshire presidential primary. So it's now my honor indeed to recognize one of the descendants of Stephen Bullock. Unfortunately, his great-grandson, David Kelly, could not be here with us today, but his great-granddaughter, Sybil Dupuy, is here. I'm going to ask her to join me up here for a photo, and then Sybil has agreed to share some of her memories of her great-grandfather.
When I was asked by Mr. Gardner to say a few words, I told him I was not a speaker. As you can see, my Aunt Edith was the speaker in the family, but I'll get into this. My mother, I should say, was the oldest of the three white-haired girls, Edith being the baby and my Aunt Elizabeth in the middle. And then Grandpa Bullock had a grandson, Kenneth Brewer. I was 9 years old when Grandpa Bullock passed away, so I do remember a few things about him as he had come to Winchester to live, and we lived in Winchester also. He was a very quiet man, extremely proud of being a member of the Odd Fellows and of the Grange. And when he left Richmond, he transferred his membership to the Winchester Grange Hall and stayed very active. I must mention that I remember his 1936 Buick. He took great pride still on Parker Street in Winchester of having his vegetable gardens and his flower gardens, and I wonder if perhaps he still missed being a farmer back in Richmond. On Sunday afternoons, in the summer months, we used to gather at my Aunt Mary's, who was his daughter, for homemade ice cream. And we had the churn, and he used to do a lot of the cranking, and we just had a wonderful time. I have a brother, and my cousin David, who has a brother, but that brother was not born at the time, so he has no memory of Grandpa Bullock. I know that the men used to gather and talk about Concord and the legislation and the legislature, but I do not ever recall anyone ever mentioning the primary either. So I had no knowledge of it until Aunt Edith was interviewed by Governor Gregg and by Bill Gardner. At that time, they were starting to write their book, and Edith had promised to loan some artifacts to them, pictures and so on, that they wanted in their book. When it came time that they needed these items, Aunt Edith was in the nursing home, had been for a few months, but they did not know about it. And the day that Bill Gardner called Winchester to speak to Edith, I had to tell him that she had passed away that morning. But things worked out fine, and Bill Gardner came down later on and met with me in Winchester, and I found the things he was seeking. And for the past 10 years now, he and I think, have become good friends and had a very good working relationship. And all the artifacts that are here in the archives that were my great-grandfather, such as his desk and the pictures and all that you saw, I have given to the state of New Hampshire. It was quite a task to clean out Aunt Edith's house. She was brought up by the Bullocks, so when everything passed to her when my great-grandfather died. And when she passed away, everything passed to me. And believe me, I'm still sorting out things. My great-grandfather died in 1941, in November of 1941, and that year was sad. He had lost his wife, he had lost a granddaughter, he had lost his daughter-in-law, and he lost 2 cousins who lived in Rhode Island. So I think he kind of lost his spirit for living, and of course it was becoming wartime, and he passed away in November before the war started. But Aunt Edith used to say that she always thought that he probably never could have coped with World War II, with gas rationing and shortage of certain foods and things, having been a farmer and always having had plenty of food to eat. So perhaps in some ways it was a blessing that he did pass on then. He was I truly believe that everything happens for a reason. Aunt Edith had saved all of these items of her grandfather. And as I say, they passed on to me. And I feel very strongly that she knew that when her time came, that at some point in time, Grandpa Bullock's possessions would find their true home, and I hope that I have done the right thing. When starting to go through things, I began to think very strongly about what will become of all these things when I'm gone, especially, and they should have their proper home. So I truly hope that everything that has been given in regard to Grandpa Bullock will find their true home in the state of New Hampshire that he truly loved. And I do hope that they will serve as a learning tool for future generations to come to love their state and to learn the history of their state. On behalf of my family and myself, I would like to thank Bill Gardner personally for all his dedication to tracking down all the history of the first primary, because it certainly means more to me than I could ever tell him or to tell you. And I would also, in closing, like to give a special thank you to Bill for all his kindnesses.
Thank you, Sybil. And now we'll move into the part of the program where we're going to introduce and invite up primary veterans and leaders from both parties who have been uniquely and intimately involved with the primary over the years. And so I get to start first and introduce someone who has been a widely revered leader here in the state for a long time, and whose family has been involved in the primary since its inception, and as we'll hear in a moment, even a little bit before then. So, ladies and gentlemen, Charlie Bass.
Jim, and to you two, and to the Secretary of State, who has, of course, roughed it out for so many years, getting reelected, has had an opportunity from time to time to think about the importance and the significance of New Hampshire political history and has done so much to memorialize forever the significance of New Hampshire's unique political history. And also a special tribute to Nat Flanagan. It was wonderful of you, Bill, to record her yesterday. She was my committee chairman when I was in the legislature in constitutional and statutory revision. I had some business issues that were preying hard on me, and I couldn't come up very much. She set me up at the very corner next to the door so that nobody would notice that I wasn't there. And then it's in subsequent, shall we say, elections, when the issue came up as to how many votes I may or may not have missed. For some reason, the committee records were not to be found any period of time. So to Nat Flanagan, a special tip of the hat. My grandfather served in the state senate from 1908 to 1910, and he was governor from 1910 to 1912. I brought up with me his campaign poster when he ran for governor, in which he talks about having sponsored the direct primary bill in New Hampshire, which became law, which is true. I don't know the details. Dave Scanlon and Bill would know better than I, but apparently the presidential part of it, the national part of it, was stripped out. When he was governor, the bill was brought up again, and I believe it was passed the House, but was defeated in the Senate by 1 vote. And then when Governor Felker took office and Representative Bullock were in the legislature, the bill was introduced and finally passed. And to be truthful about this, it had very little relevance at the time to the presidential primary and the way the New Hampshire primary is viewed today. If you look back to the early 20th century, the political process in New Hampshire was controlled by one company, the Boston and Maine Railroad, and both parties were controlled by that company because they provided passes to legislators to get to Congress, and they were free. If you weren't on the side of the B&M Railroad, you didn't get to Congress, and therefore you couldn't vote. And the president of the company, as I recall, his name is Lucius Tuttle. He had a throne room in the Eagle Hotel where the leaders of both houses and Senate came for their weekly legislative assignments. And people like my grandfather, who had served in the legislature and also in the state senate, rejected this kind of government. And they knew that ultimately, if the people themselves had the ability to vote for individuals for office that they believed were the right person to be there because of their ideas and their willingness to work and so forth, that we would have a better government in New Hampshire. And I think that was the fundamental purpose of that legislation, which of course it became law and now is really changed the scene politically for New Hampshire for all time. So to the Bullock family and Representative Bullock's wonderful accomplishments in 1913, to Governor Felker's descendants, but most importantly also to the people who are here today that care so much about this important tradition, not only for New Hampshire, but for America. Thank you for making this great event possible.
Our next speaker has been called by his local hometown newspaper as the champion of the New Hampshire presidential primary. I think after seeing today's introduction, we would probably call him the Stephen Bullock of modern times. But Jim Splain, as a former state representative and state senator, has waged the fight to keep our primary first almost every single cycle. And I think it goes back to 1975 when he first introduced legislation that said that the New Hampshire primary will be 1 week earlier than any other state thinks they're going to be. And that has been the battle that has been waged many times, but Jim Splain has been the more recent father of protecting our primary, so it's a pleasure to introduce Jim Splain.
As I was walking into the State House this morning, I don't come here too often lately, but as I was walking in, I was just thinking, it's just amazing how much vision people in this building have. And sometimes we don't even know it for 100 years. But 100 years ago today, in this building, this very building, these chambers near us, somebody came up with an idea to find a way to be able to get the smoke-filled rooms out of the process a little bit and have a vote by the people on delegates to a convention that who would choose a president of the United States. Imagine, just imagine for a moment, if Representative Bullock had not, as a farmer, come up with that idea one day when he was probably working in his farm, that it's important to get people into the process instead of politicians into the process. And we've seen so many times since, of course, that party leaders throughout the country, people in other states, want to find a way to be able to take New Hampshire's primary away from us. But since we pay for our primary, and since we have an artist in Bill Gardner and being able to administer our law that says we're going to be 1 week ahead of any other state, the primary does indeed go on and on and on. But it's because of that kind of vision, sometimes we don't even know what the important votes will be on a given day, that we will be thankful for 100 years later. But it's that kind of vision that led this country, changed this country in the way that we elect presidents of the United States. So, to all of the Bullocks, thank you very much. And the primary indeed does go on and on and on because of all of the people in this room. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Jim, and a lot of Jims in the room today. As Jim Demers just mentioned, it's a fight. Every couple of years, we go through a process whether one or more states want to jump in front of New Hampshire, squeeze New Hampshire, and infringe on our First in the Nation primary. And so the next two gentlemen that I get to introduce, they've been in that fight for a long time. And I can't think of two more ardent defenders of the primary than the folks I'm about to introduce. The first, the former party chairman for the Republican Party in New Hampshire, is our current Republican National Committee man, a great friend and a business leader here in the state, Steve Dupree.
There are two of us here, Jim Splain and I, can confirm that at no point in his life did Secretary of State Gardner ever have a head of hair like Governor Felker. And he looked the same way when we elected him Secretary of State as he does today. He's ageless. But while we celebrate the 100th anniversary, everybody who's involved in the primary knows that every 4 years there's a battle and there's a lot of juggling, and we have been extraordinarily well served by the stewardship of Bill Gardner and being the quarterback of that fight, so I would be remiss if I didn't thank him. I will tell you, when I was first elected to the Republican National Committee in 1992 as state chairman, the late Governor Hugh Gregg was the committee man, and we sat down at the first meeting. He said, I'm going to give you one piece of advice. Never let there be an up or down vote on whether the New Hampshire primary should go first. We'll lose. There was a lot of resentment, a lot of hostility, but mostly a lot of misunderstanding of how well our primary worked. And over 20 years, through my stewardship and then Tom Rath, and now I'm being recycled, we've gone from dislike and suspicion to grudging acceptance to now a realization, at least in the Republican Party, and I think Ray will say the same of the Democratic Party, and Kathy will attest to that, that we do our job exceptionally well. There isn't any state convention where bosses get to pick, although Ray and I would both like that perhaps sometime. There's no caucus where you have to come back once, twice, or 3 times to pick delegates. In New Hampshire, it works because it's simple. We let the people decide. And that's why there is now not only a growing acceptance of New Hampshire's special role, but I would say at the Republican National Committee, there has been an endorsement of it by the exceptionally strong penalties that have been put in place. People understand it works, and that's why we have our primary. The second thing I would say, with the exception of 2 or 3 instances, and when it happens, everybody who's involved calls up the transgressor and says, knock it off. When one side is having trouble with their rules, or the other party is having trouble with their rules, the parties do not attack each other on fights about the primary scheduling. We all realize we have these arcane party structures. We have to work in concert. And when sometimes we see juggling with the calendar on the Democratic side, it is inappropriate for the Republicans to take shots at that, and vice versa. Because regardless of party, as John McCain says, Republican, Democrat, vegetarian, libertarian, egalitarian, we all love this process that lets the people decide. So may that bipartisanship on this issue continue for the next 100 years, and our primary will stay first and stay as important as it is to democracy. It's a pleasure to be here. Bill Gardner is not 100 years old.
being chairman of the New Hampshire Democratic Party, just like being chairperson of the New Hampshire Republican Party, those two individuals have an important role to play in welcoming every potential presidential candidate to our state and to make sure that they're all treated fairly and equally. Our next speaker has certainly played that role for several years. But I first met Ray Buckley. One of the first issues I worked on was a fight to preserve the New Hampshire primary. That goes back to 1980, 33 years ago, when a particular state wanted to jump ahead of New Hampshire because they had a candidate from that state running and they wanted to get off to a good start. And so the battle began. There was a lot of maneuvering, but Ray, working with then House Democratic leader Chris Spiro, played a very active role in ensuring that New Hampshire stayed first. And so it's been a battle, but he's done a great job both presenting our case at the national level as well as being that referee and that welcoming person to the candidates. Well, let me welcome Ray Buckley.
You can imagine my delight as I was starting to read the board and realizing that the governor who signed it into law was a Democrat, and then hear that Representative Bullock was a Democrat, and then I spotted my father's cousin over there, Representative Parkhurst, sitting with the family. I'm thinking, sweet Jesus, am I related to the Bullocks? My birthday has come early, but I think Henry's just taking a seat. I also think, Madam Speaker, that you might want to add a little to that commission, because that, although 2016 will be the 100th anniversary of the first actual primary, it will also be the 40th anniversary of Bill Garner's election as Secretary of State. And certainly, if anyone who deserves to be honored along with the primary is our history maker, longest serving state Secretary of State in American history. He says he's going to try for 100 years, and I think he's going to do it. What an amazing honor that we have as working together to protect the primary and to celebrate the primary, the opportunity that the average citizen of New Hampshire, and still trying to explain that to individuals around the country, of that any individual, Democrat, Independent, Republican, unregistered, or visitor, can show up at an open town hall meeting and talk to any candidate running for president and ask them any question. And people are amazed that that opportunity still exists here in New Hampshire. And all of us have, every person who's remotely involved in New Hampshire has multiple New Hampshire primary stories. And I always like to tell the young people about the summer of '75 when I was volunteering for the Jimmy Carter campaign at their Concord headquarters, and my dad was working up at the foundry, and so he'd drop me off at 6:30 in the morning, and so they'd leave out things. They gave me a key, I'd start doing things, and so they gave me the task for the entire month of July 1975 of handwriting postcards inviting every registered Democrat in Pennacook to a house party up in Pennacook. And then they told me to look up the phone numbers in the phone book. My staff doesn't know what a phone book is, but it's one of those big things that you had to look up the numbers. And hand dial every single one of them, and that was before answering machines, so you had to keep calling them until you reached them. So I spent the entire month, and so then the big day of the Carter house party was happening. It was a Saturday around 2 o'clock. I think it was August 7th or 8th in 1975. They gave me a call at home and said, Governor Carter wants you to ride with him to the event. And I was so excited. This is, what an opportunity. So all the way up, he's talking to me, and we arrive at the house, and there were a total of 3 guests that showed up, including the UPI reporter, Brenda Rotswell. Some of you may remember her. But that didn't deter any of us, because in the New Hampshire primary, we know those who work hard are successful. And 6 months later, he won the New Hampshire primary and went on to be president. The other story about that particular is that every Wednesday evening at 7 o'clock, about 25 of us would get together at the Carter headquarters, which, as I said, was on the 2nd floor on Pleasant Street. We'd walk up and get there, and Billy Shaheen was the state chair, and he would just enthrall us with enthusiasm about getting out. We've got the best candidate. Doesn't matter that the polls don't even register with him. Work hard, work hard. And you know, this woman, this pretty blonde woman in her 20s, who had a baby, would often sit next to me, and she'd offer to, get me a sandwich or get me a soda, and I was reasonably pleasant to her, and grateful for her to do that. Little did I know that she would end up being the governor of the state of New Hampshire and the U.S. Senator, and so, as I say, I was clearly sucking up to the wrong Shaheen at the age of 15, but I have corrected myself on many occasions. It has been an amazing opportunity. I remember being a staffer here and meeting Ronald Reagan. I can remember as in '75 standing out on the State House lawn and meeting Gerald Ford. I have pictures with Bob Dole, with John McCain. We in New Hampshire get that opportunity to talk to these folks, meet them, and I think really bring a special responsibility to the American public. And we all fight together, and we will do that successfully for as long as there is a democracy. So thank you all for being here. Congratulations, Bill, for putting this together. And let's celebrate in 2016 with a great big party. Thank you.
And hearing you talk about a house party with 3 people has just given anyone that's worked a campaign here flashbacks. We've all been there for those events that don't quite go as well. Well, I introduced Steve Dupree before as a staunch defender of the primary, and our next speaker is equally as so, and has been for many years. He's our former Attorney General, our former Republican National Committee man, and someone that I've spent the last 7 years in the foxhole with, on behalf of Mitt Romney, with the ups and the downs, our good friend Tom Rath.
Thank you, Jim, and thank you, Secretary, Madam Speaker. Very much appreciate the opportunity to be here with you today. I want to commend and thank the Bullock family for your attendance. I worked on the passage of that bill. Very funny. And it was close, you know. We got a bad recommendation of the House committee were able to turn around on the floor. Thank you, Ray. It's the primary is an extraordinary circumstance. It is something that is whether it was by design or whether it is the sort of creation of history, it is a unique possession of this state. Steve is exactly right. Ray told me the same thing. Don't ever let there be a vote on this. Today we welcome the votes because I think we approved, all of us, Republicans, Democrats, and particularly in our state, independents, about how valid a test it is, how real it is. You find very few candidates who become president, or even the nominees of their party, who, when they talk about the experience, refer to any other state they've been to as much as they refer to New Hampshire. And I've always thought that the test is not whether the New Hampshire primary produces a good winner. The test has always been, does the New Hampshire primary produce a better president? And when they get up in the States of the Union and they talk about the mill worker they met in Berlin or the fisherman they met in Portsmouth, those are sometimes the last people, real people, those who we make presidents see. And I think it is critical that they come from a place like this that takes it so seriously. The nation gets a lot, we get a lot, there's so few of our friends in the national press here today. But I think the real special quality for those of us in New Hampshire that the primary gives is it is the single greatest portal into public service, into political life, into participation in our democracy that we have. Madam Speaker, I think you can take a look at the House, and a huge number of their members, Republicans and Democrats, first got involved in the New Hampshire political process through the primary, by working for a candidate, and it is so accessible and so open. And whether they become school board members or governors or selectmen or state senators or whatever, It is because they saw an opportunity to serve, to give, and they were rewarded by it because they felt important about what they did. They felt they made a contribution. And it's that enduring level of citizen participation that, to me, has always formed this process and made it so valuable for us. It is a statewide civics lesson, and it's one that everybody participates in with great fun and enjoyment. I do thank Jimmy for the very kind remarks about how graceful we have been, getting a little too practiced at being graceful. So I've always let that change, but what will not change is the affection and camaraderie each of us have for the others who play at this game, who take it seriously, for the extraordinary honor that folks like the Bullocks and of course the Secretary have given us, and Jimmy Splain has given us over the years. All of us who've been able to fight for it are privileged to have been co-combatants with you in that battle, and I'm convinced I will probably be here for the next one 100 years from now. Thank you.
Moving right along. You know, there's a lot that goes on with a primary. We see so much of it that's out front, but there's a lot that happens behind the scenes as well. And our next speaker, having served as chairman of the Democratic Party here in New Hampshire, and as New Hampshire's representative to the DNC, has also made the case repeatedly for keeping our First of the Nation primary. But one of the things that both parties have to do after the primary is over, and let's face it, sometimes they're a little boring, sometimes they can be extremely spirited, is to pull everyone together when it's over and reunite. And I saw firsthand in 2008, Kathy Sullivan stepped forward after a primary season that went on to all 50 states and sit down with Democrats in this state and help bring everyone together to make sure that they were united. And this happens on both sides of the aisle. That's the kind of stuff that happens behind the scenes. So Kathy Sullivan has been one of those who has worked tirelessly to protect and make sure that our primary continues. It's my pleasure to introduce the DNC member, Kathy Sullivan.
Well, thank you all very much for being here. And I've got to say how impressed I am, Mrs. Dupuy, saving everything. And you have done the right thing. You have found a home where your great-grandfather's belongings. And I want to thank you because it is people like Mrs. Dupuy, sort of like the unsung heroes who we don't hear about, who are the backbone of the state of New Hampshire, people who go out and they vote. Sometimes they might run for the legislature, but they're the ones who, you know, they go out, they vote, they participate, they make good decisions or thoughtful decisions about how they're going to vote, and that's why our primary is still here today, because of the voters of the state of New Hampshire. And how one of the things you hear about from candidates and reporters from out of state, you know, people who come here, is how educated our voters are on the issues. And I remember being at an event, and Dick Gephardt was walking in, it was one of his events, and someone going up to him and saying, "I'd like to talk to you about my thoughts on the crisis in Cyprus." And I'm saying, my goodness gracious, you know, that this would happen in New Hampshire. That some, you know, regular New Hampshire citizen can do that. And that is just an amazing thing. And it really is what Representative Flanagan said in her piece. She said, one person doesn't do everything alone. And I think that's one of the lessons that we have from the primary. It's not, although it has a lot to do with Bill Gardner, and it has a lot to do with a lot of people in this room, but it really has a lot to do with the voters of the state of New Hampshire who go out, they go to the town meetings. Now, of course, you stand in line, you know, you have to go through the metal detectors, and it's a process. It's not as easy as it always used to be, but they still get out there, they still participate, they still talk to the candidates, they still ask the tough questions. And that's what makes the New Hampshire primary the best political event ever in the history of our country and on the planet. So I want to thank the voters. I want to thank the voters of New Hampshire, past and present, and in the future, because it's because of them that we are all here today. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kathy. And so next we're going to go, both of our U.S. senators couldn't be with us today, but they've graciously sent along their state directors to read a brief letter from each of them. And so on behalf of Senator Ayotte, I'm proud to introduce Bud Fitch.
Thank you. From United States Senator Kelly Ayotte. Dear Secretary Gardner and attendees, I commend you for this celebration of the 100th anniversary of the signing of the Bullock Act, an act which first established the right for the voters of New Hampshire to directly elect delegates to the national party conventions held to nominate candidates for President of the United States. I join you in spirit as you honor New Hampshire's role in giving voters a significantly greater direct role in their choice of our nation's elected leader. I am proud that our state made history 100 years ago today through adoption of the Bullock Act. Everyone here should be justified in being proud that New Hampshire continues to exemplify government that is of the people, for the people, and by the people. Sincerely, Kelly Ayotte, United States Senator.
And representing Senator Shaheen, two primary players and just one, a primary player, and staffer for Senator Shaheen, Mike Glassman.
Thank you. I also want to acknowledge my congressional office counterparts, Jackie Silly and Sean Downey, who are here today as well, and my friend Bud Fitch. I'm here to read these words from Senator Shaheen. Dear friends, Billy and I wish we could be with you today as you mark the 100th anniversary of the law creating New Hampshire's presidential primary. Since 1916, New Hampshire voters have tried and tested nearly every occupant of our country's highest office. Our primary has given life to underdog candidates such as Gary Hart in 1984 and John McCain in 2000. The New Hampshire primary allows candidates who don't have a lot of money to make the case directly to voters. The testing New Hampshire voters give candidates prepares candidates for service in national office. My first involvement in politics was volunteering on Jimmy Carter's long-shot campaign for president in 1976, and it remains a cherished memory. New Hampshire citizens take seriously the responsibility of participating in civic life. It is no surprise that a state so enthusiastic about local and national affairs would take such a personal interest in presidential elections. I thank everyone here for your tireless efforts to preserve this proud tradition. Keep up the fight, and together we will ensure that future generations have the same opportunity to participate in the first presidential primary that we have all enjoyed. Sincerely, Gene Shaheen, United States Senator.
Before I introduce our next to last speaker, I wanted to make two brief plugs. First of all, if you look at the pictures here, these beautiful placards that are set up, you know, this is done by our friends in Manchester. I'll speak about in a second. You know, a lot of our speakers today have talked about how the primary is about the people, and it is. It's about the voters, and it's really the voters' engagement in this process that's made the primary so vibrant over the years. It's also about institutions. Bill Gardner's an institution, but so is the Institute of Politics at St. Anselm College, who are a great academic resource and a megaphone for the primary. And so they've been instrumental in this process and this event here today, and in the year-long celebration for the 100th anniversary of the primary. So I want to thank them, and Neil Levesque is here somewhere. We should recognize him in the work that they do as well. So thank you all. The second plug I want to make, and this goes to something, another theme we've heard about today, is bipartisanship. Republican, Democrat, we all work together on behalf of the presidential primary. It's one place where we put down our swords and we get along to promote this great institution that we all enjoy as a state. A few weeks ago, a committee of us, most of the speakers here today, came together to raise nonprofit funds for the primary monument in the state library front lawn just across the street here. I'd encourage you to go visit it today. It's a monument that reflects the winners of the primary as well as the participants. Former Governor Hugh Gregg was instrumental in getting that monument installed over there. So I'd encourage you to go check it out. It reflects our primary, its history, and our tradition. And consider making a donation to it. We're accepting contributions only up to $75 to reflect the grassroots nature of the primary. It's a fun bipartisan project that we all can work on together. So with that, I'm very happy to introduce Senate President Peter Bragdon.
Thank you, Jim. You know, you learn something new every day. When I heard that the presidential primary was 100 years old, I thought, well, Gardner must be like 150 or something. Though I do remind him from time to time that he served as a state representative with my grandfather. So that comes up every once in a while in discussions. You know, there has been, in certainly my lifetime, in my political lifetime, no greater defender of the New Hampshire primary than our Secretary of State, Bill Gardner. And I think all of us, Republicans, Democrats, undeclareds, and really everyone who has a love of politics in New Hampshire owes a debt of gratitude to Bill Gardner for all that he's done for the presidential primary. And I thank you on behalf of the State Senate for that work that you do. Just a few notes. I had to break out from a budget meeting to come here, and I got to get back in there before things get into. Ray says, no, I don't. I need to get back down there. But just a couple of thoughts that I'm not going to talk a lot about the various stories of all the different candidates, because in reality, a lot of people in this room have been involved in a lot of those stories. I take a little bit of exception with what Jim Merrill just said, that we put our swords away for the primary. We really don't. We just turn them on each other in our own. Wasn't much fun. Yeah, exactly. And then we get back to what we usually do. So, but without all the particular stories, I think we've all been involved in something where there's that excitement and that buzz. And it starts from a meeting in someone's living room with 3 people. I think when John McCain first came to New Hampshire, when I first got involved in the presidential primary, one of the first events was a backyard ice cream social in Amherst at Bob Rowe's house that had a dozen or so people. And then by the closing times of the campaign, you just you couldn't seat all the people in auditoriums and all the buses to get it done. And just the level of excitement that it brings to the state of New Hampshire. And we see it now starting again in the last week and a half. We've had 2 Republican potential presidential candidates come wandering through. I'm sure they just happened to be in the neighborhood and decided to stop by. And I assume pretty soon we'll be starting to see some things on the other side as well. But the New Hampshire primary is very important, very influential, and I'll close with just a quote from the late David Broder, who said that what we do here in New Hampshire is that we eliminate the also-rans. And because we do it in such a very efficient manner, the whole country benefits because of what happens here in New Hampshire. So thanks to everybody who's been involved, and here's to another 100 years.
Well, you know, one day you're on the steering committee of a presidential candidate, and the next day you're governor of the state of New Hampshire. I'm honored to introduce our governor. You know, one of the things that happens in the state when you're an activist involved in presidential campaigns is you build relationships with the candidates. And many times it's more than just a relationship, you build real friendships. And I would think as you become governor of the state of New Hampshire, having those kind of relationships and friendships can help governing a little bit easier. Because having that kind of access and that kind of relationship to call the President of the United States if there's a crisis in your state and you need help, or to be able to call the Vice President or whoever the elected official might be to discuss whether it's protecting the Portsmouth Naval Shipyard or making sure that a funding item is put into the budget is really one of the key things that can come out of our New Hampshire primary. And that Maggie Hassan has proven that she's been able to build the kind of relationships with Barack Obama, Joe Biden, Hillary Clinton, and the list goes on and on. That's what comes out of our primary. So it is my pleasure to introduce to you our governor, Maggie Hassan.
Thanks to all of you for being here. A special thank you to Secretary Gardner for everything he has done to preserve our first in the nation primary, but also to organize today's event. As Jim was just talking, And as Jim Merrill was just talking, I was also thinking about the New Hampshire experience that the primary gives us all. If you haven't been to Exeter recently, a plug for my hometown, you know, we have a lot of small restaurants and little pubs. And if you go into one of those pubs on any Friday or Saturday night, just about any time, but particularly as a presidential cycle is warming up, you will find friends and neighbors, Republicans and Democrats and undeclared voters, talking about each other's races, talking about what drives different candidates, what policies or platforms are going to be important to the country moving forward. You hear and you witness a level of citizen activism that reminds you that all of us in this state care greatly about each other, about the state, and about the country. And it is one of the great gifts that the New Hampshire primary gives us. I'll also note that it's not very often that a mother can say that her 10-year-old daughter turns to her one day and says, you know, Joe Biden is the best guy we've got on foreign policy, if you've been watching. That's another great gift that the New Hampshire First in the Nation primary gives all of us. So I am just so honored to be here today to celebrate this 100th birthday. 100 years ago today, Governor Samuel Felker signed into law the Bullock Act. On the same day it passed the House and Senate, giving Granite Staters a direct vote for national party convention delegates, a change from what had been a caucus system. It was this change that paved the way for New Hampshire's primary to become the first step along the path to presidency. The Bullock Act allowed New Hampshire to more fully embrace one of our greatest assets, our robust citizen democracy. I like to say that in New Hampshire, we do democracy better than anywhere else on earth. We provide an unmatched ability for every citizen to participate. With 424 state representatives and senators, we have the third largest legislative body in the English-speaking world, made up of dedicated volunteers who give of their time and lend their experience to improve their communities. We have city councils and community boards and advisory panels, all driven by citizens who understand that our individual success is dependent on our collective progress. That high level of democratic participation has meant that New Hampshire citizens are as engaged and well-informed on the issues as any citizens in the country. We have carried that tradition into the presidential nomination process. New Hampshire's primary is first because we were the first to truly recognize that direct citizen involvement in the nomination process makes for better presidential candidates and better presidents. Every 4 years, the entire nation watches as candidates experience the gauntlet of tough but knowledgeable questions from our voters. It is a quintessentially New Hampshire tradition, emblematic of the hard work, community involvement, and rugged individualism that makes our state as strong as granite. Through the years, other states have tried to usurp our status, but we have held strong. This is thanks in large part to the efforts of Secretary of State Bill Gardner. Thank you again, Bill, for your steadfast defense of our first in the nation status. Though we have just finished a presidential year, we all know that candidates are already gearing up, as Senate President Bragdon just noticed, for 2016. And before we know it, the New Hampshire primary will again be in full swing. I, for one, look forward to the tradition continuing for another 100 years and beyond. It's not an accident that in a place where we understand that self-government truly works, where we all engage in it, that we fight so hard to preserve our ability to engage every candidate who comes through our state so that our country is a better, stronger place as a result. So I thank you all for being here. I would like now to read a proclamation marking May 21st, 2013 as New Hampshire Primary Day. It just means I have to go through the microphones here. New Hampshire Primary Day. Whereas the New Hampshire primary has played a proud and important role in selecting the President of the United States, and whereas the New Hampshire primary has its roots in the Bullock Act, passed by both houses of the New Hampshire legislature and signed into law by Governor Sam Felker 100 years ago on May 21st, 1913. And whereas the Bullock Act gave Granite Staters a direct vote for National Party Convention delegates, leading to New Hampshire's first in the nation presidential primary. And whereas the New Hampshire primary's first in the nation status is an important and historic distinction enshrined in New Hampshire law. And whereas New Hampshire's history of democratic participation at every level has meant that Granite State citizens are among the most politically engaged and knowledgeable voters in the nation. And whereas the New Hampshire primary is a quintessential New Hampshire tradition that captures the essence of community involvement, rugged individualism, and dedicated hard work of our people. And whereas the New Hampshire primary proudly demonstrates to the nation and the world of the strength of our people and our robust citizen-led democracy. Now, therefore, I, Margaret Wood Hasson, Governor of the State of New Hampshire, do hereby proclaim May 21st, 2013 as New Hampshire Primary Day in the state of New Hampshire and urge all residents to celebrate the essential aspect of our state's history and to continue to embrace the importance of their civic duties. Given this day, the 21st day of May in the year of our Lord 2013, and the independence of the United States of America 237. Thank you. Finally, to honor Governor Sam Felker for signing into law the legislation that gave birth to our primary, I would like to invite up members of the Felker family who are here today. We have a citation honoring their family's part in this piece of New Hampshire history.
Thank you, Governor Hasson, distinguished guests. You may wonder why someone by the name of David Berry should be a descendant of a distinguished governor of the state of New Hampshire. Well, Governor Felker's aunt married my great-grandfather, so Mary Susan Felker became the wife of Jonathan Fowler Berry, and so this is the result. I believe Governor Hampshire would be pleased to know that Governor Felker was the first Democrat to be elected governor for 50 years. And that's quite a accomplishment. When Mr. Gardner called me and told me that I was probably as close as anybody to Governor Felker, I decided to follow in his footsteps a little bit and find out just what he was all about. And all I had to go to was Tonic, which is actually kind of a suburb of Rochester, and there was Felker Street and Demerit Street. And I'm quite sure I even found the house where he may have lived, but I'm not that sure. Anyway, I followed him, went to the Rochester Historical Society, and they had many articles about Governor Felker, and most of them were very complimentary, and he had served as mayor of Rochester, and the portraits of all the mayors of Rochester up around the rooms. Unfortunately, they were repainting Governor Felker's room, and his portrait was in storage at that time. But anyway, his photograph will be there. And then in the account, I read at his funeral in 1932, he was buried out of the Congregational Church where I have been a member for over 60 years. And the account said that the church was packed and there were people outside. So he was apparently well known, well loved. One of the pallbearers, as a matter of fact, was a lawyer by the name of Bert Cooper, who was the father of a very good friend of mine, Richard Cooper. And so I thought, well, at least I should know where he's buried. And so I went scouting around the Rochester Cemetery, and lo and behold, I found quite a nice stone, and there was Samuel D. buried right there on the stone. So I guess the moral of this story is that if you shake the family tree hard enough, you'll find you've got a good apple.
Thank you all very much for being here today. If you will direct your attention to the cake, the birthday cake on the table, Governor Hassan and Speaker Norelli are going to do the ceremonial cutting of the cake.